Do you want to know the single thing that can actually make a narcissist say sorry? It's not the person who once stared straight at you and told you that your pain wasn't real suddenly growing a conscience. It has nothing to do with pleading with them, and it has nothing to do with laying out your side of the story in painstaking detail, hoping this time the words will finally land. It's something much quieter than that, and honestly, something far more powerful than anything you could say out loud, because the instant you do this one thing, the certainty they've built their whole identity on starts to fracture. Their confidence wavers, and what comes out of them next is the closest thing to real accountability they are capable of producing. Before we get into how you actually hold this boundary without slipping back into the same old cycle, stick around, because the next part is where all of this finally clicks into place. Here's the truth nobody wants to hear. Narcissists don't apologize because they suddenly feel your pain. Empathy was never the engine running their relationships in the first place. What actually drives them is supply, attention, validation, power, admiration, control, all of it. When a narcissist hurts you, they are not quietly replaying the moment and wondering how much damage it did to your heart. They are running a completely different calculation. They are asking themselves whether this situation threatens their image, their comfort, their access to whatever they want, or their sense of being above everyone else. If none of those things are at risk, there is zero internal motivation for them to feel bad. Their entire emotional wiring is built around self-preservation instead of connection, which is exactly why they can watch you fall apart and feel nothing close to the horror a normal person would feel witnessing that. But something shifts the second their bad behavior starts costing them something. The moment you pull your attention back, stop the endless back and forth arguments, stop trying to make them understand your feelings, and quietly take the emotional fuel away that used to keep them running, their supply gets cut off in a way that actually rattles them. That disruption, not compassion, not a sudden moral awakening, is what wakes them up. This is precisely why their apologies tend to show up only once their access to you feels threatened. The moment you become unreachable, or the moment their grip on you starts to loosen, they start to sense that their behavior finally has a price tag attached to it. And if there's one thing a narcissist truly cannot stand, it's paying an emotional price. Their apology, when it comes, is purely a transaction. It's a calculated maneuver meant to restore their sense of balance, not a genuine expression of understanding what they put you through. When their environment changes and you stop functioning as their emotional cushion, they read that as a serious threat. That threat could mean losing you completely, losing the admiration they've grown addicted to, losing the stability of daily control, or losing the polished self-image they've built for the world to see. To fight off that threat, they might offer something that looks a lot like taking responsibility. But make no mistake, they haven't discovered empathy overnight. They're simply trying to grab back a benefit they can feel slipping through their fingers, and that's exactly why calm, steady withdrawal hits them harder than any screaming match or tearful confrontation ever could. Your total lack of reaction says one thing loud and clear: they are losing their grip. And for someone whose entire existence runs on control and attention, that loss is unbearable. The apology that eventually surfaces is nothing more than their attempt to restore the balance that benefits them. So why does walking away quietly do so much more damage to them than yelling ever could? Because narcissists don't feed on understanding, they feed on intensity. When you come at them with anger, tears, long-winded explanations, or desperate pleading, you might believe you're finally getting through to them, communicating the depth of your hurt. But what they're actually seeing is engagement. To them, engagement means they still matter, that they're still shaping your day-to-day life, that they're still living somewhere in your head rent-free. That reaction, even when it's negative, is pure fuel, and it keeps their whole system running. Even your pain, when expressed loudly, feels to them like confirmation that they're still fully in charge. Emotional withdrawal creates an entirely different reality, one they simply don't know how to handle. The moment you stop reacting, the moment your voice turns calm and measured instead of desperate, and the moment you quit trying to make them see your point of view, the whole system they've built collapses under its own weight. You are no longer a dependable source of validation or drama. You become neutral, and neutral is the one thing a narcissist has no defense against. To be clear, this isn't the silent treatment, and it isn't some childish punishment dressed up as maturity. It's simply refusing to keep playing the role they've cast you in. Instead of begging for fairness, you become plainly factual. Instead of over-explaining your position, you become brief and to the point. Instead of getting pulled into arguments, you quietly hold your boundaries and protect your own energy. And that alone strips away the constant chaos cycle that used to make them feel powerful and in control. Narcissists rely heavily on your emotional reactions to keep their sense of dominance intact. They provoke you on purpose just to keep you off balance. They criticize you so you're forced into defending yourself. They lay on the guilt so you feel compelled to explain your every move. When you withdraw emotionally, you cut off their access to exactly the reactions that used to fuel their power. This puts them in an incredibly uncomfortable spot. All of a sudden, they can't read you anymore. They can't predict what you'll do next. They can't pull you back in with guilt, with charm, or with quiet intimidation. They can't provoke you into a fight. Your calm becomes deeply unsettling to them because in their mind, a lack of visible emotion signals a total loss of control on your end, except it's actually the opposite. They start silently panicking, wondering if they're losing their hold on you, and that fear is often exactly what pushes them into behavior they normally avoid at all costs, including something that resembles an apology. But understand this, they're doing it strictly to reconnect emotionally, not because they've suddenly grasped how much pain they caused you. Your distance is sending them a very clear message. You're no longer reacting to them the way you used to. And that loss of influence is what applies enough pressure to force a change in their behavior, even if it's only temporary. That said, none of this works unless your boundaries are backed by consistent, repeated action. Narcissists don't respond to gentle words, heartfelt emotion, or promises that never get kept. They respond only to outcomes. You could repeat the same boundary 100 separate times, but if you keep tolerating the same behavior underneath it, that boundary means absolutely nothing to them. Narcissists will test your limits over and over again. They watch closely to see whether your no is a real boundary or something that can be worn down through guilt, manipulation, or sheer persistence until it eventually turns into a soft, fine, whatever. The second they spot even a small crack of inconsistency, they read it as an open invitation to keep pushing. This is exactly why any boundary you set with a narcissist has to be firm, calm, and applied every single time without exception. Otherwise, that boundary stops being protection and instead becomes just another opportunity for them to exploit. When you follow a boundary up with real action instead of more talking, you shift the entire dynamic away from emotional back and forth and into undeniable, observable reality. Instead of trying to convince them how much their behavior hurt you, you simply change your response to it. If they raise their voice, you calmly leave the room. If they insult you, you end the conversation right then. If they cross a line you've already made clear, you scale back your availability or limit their access to you altogether. The real key here is following through every time. Narcissists push hard because they fully expect you to eventually cave under the pressure. When you don't cave, you completely shatter the mental map they've built of how to control you. That consistency becomes the shock that cracks their sense of entitlement. Because for maybe the first time, they're seeing proof that their usual playbook simply doesn't work on you anymore. Holding firm, consistent boundaries also changes something inside you. You stop reacting out of fear, guilt, or those same old emotional patterns you've probably repeated for years. Instead, you start operating from a place of genuine self-respect. This creates a kind of stability they're not used to seeing from you, one where you no longer reward their bad behavior with endless attention, long emotional explanations, or constant engagement. Narcissists thrive on chaos. They provoke, you react, and they slide right back into control. A steady, unbreakable boundary breaks that entire cycle apart. Eventually, they start to understand that certain actions come with real, unavoidable consequences, whether that's physical distance, total silence, reduced access, or losing the influence they've depended on for so long. That understanding is sometimes what nudges them toward an apology or a temporary shift in how they treat you. Not because they've suddenly absorbed the weight of what they did to you, but because your unwavering consistency has introduced an actual cost to their toxic patterns. Boundaries backed by real follow-through force them to recognize that you are no longer someone they can easily bend, manipulate, or pull back into old destructive routines. Think about what this actually looks like day to day, because it's rarely as dramatic as walking out forever. It might mean that when they call you 5 times in a row, demanding an explanation for something small, you answer once, say what you need to say calmly, and then let the phone ring the next 4 times without a shred of guilt. It might mean that when they bring up something from months ago just to derail an argument you were finally winning, you simply decline to follow that thread and repeat what the actual issue is. It might mean that when they go quiet and cold to punish you for setting a boundary, you don't chase after them asking what's wrong because you already know exactly what's wrong. You did something they didn't like, and now they're testing whether you'll cave. These small, almost boring moments of consistency are where the real shift happens. It's rarely one dramatic stand you take once. It's 100 small refusals to go back to the old script, repeated so many times that eventually even they stop expecting the old reaction from you. A narcissist's greatest fear at the core of it all is losing access, losing admiration, or losing influence, because those three things form the entire foundation of their fragile sense of self. To them, relationships were never really about genuine connection in the first place. Relationships are resources to be collected and managed. You are viewed as a source of validation, attention, admiration, or usefulness. When that resource feels secure and easy to reach, they feel powerful. When it feels like it's slipping away, their whole internal world starts to shake. This is why they so often come across as arrogant, dismissive, or flat-out cruel. They simply assume you'll always stick around, always forgive them eventually, always keep explaining your feelings, and always tolerate whatever they throw at you. They lean heavily on your emotional investment because it guarantees their own sense of superiority and control. The moment that investment starts to feel uncertain, a quiet panic sets in, one they will never openly admit to. Losing access means they no longer have an emotional or practical hold over your life. Losing admiration means they're no longer seen as special, superior, or above everyone else around them. Losing influence means their power to shape your emotions and steer your reactions is quickly slipping away. These losses cut straight to their identity because narcissists depend entirely on outside validation just to keep their fragile self-worth propped up. They are simply not capable of generating a sense of stability from within themselves. Everything about their existence hinges on the attention they manage to pull from the people around them. So when you stop engaging with them emotionally, when you genuinely detach and stop reacting the way you used to, you trigger a deep fear in them of becoming completely irrelevant. That fear often causes them to switch tactics almost overnight. They might suddenly turn apologetic, unusually kind, or dramatically attentive toward you. They might even try to recreate that early idealization phase, hoping it will pull you right back into their orbit. But their apology isn't rooted in real guilt or empathy. It's rooted in fear. They can sense that your emotional distance might soon turn into physical distance, and that physical distance could eventually become a total loss of access to you. They apologize to secure their position again, to keep their supply flowing, and to make sure they still hold a spot somewhere in your mind and your life. This same fear of losing influence is exactly why they react so intensely whenever you show real independence, groundedness, or self-respect. To them, those qualities are warning signs that you might be slipping out from under their control. When their admiration and access feel threatened, an internal alarm goes off that pushes them to do whatever it takes to regain their footing, including, on rare occasion, offering something that looks like an apology purely out of self-preservation. Calm detachment rattles a narcissist far more than anger ever could, simply because they thrive on emotional volatility and reactions they can predict. When you respond with anger, hurt, or frustration, you're still feeding directly into their system, even if it feels like you're finally standing up for yourself. Every outburst, every desperate plea, every flash of frustration confirms to them that they still hold power over your emotional state. They interpret that intensity as solid proof that they still matter, that they're still in control, and that the same old drama cycle is still running exactly as they expect. Anger might escalate the conflict in the moment, but it rarely produces any lasting change, because it's still playing by the rules of a game they designed specifically to keep you reacting. Calm detachment breaks every one of those rules. When you detach calmly, you remove the predictable reactions they depend on to manipulate, provoke, or dominate you. You create a kind of emotional vacuum they simply cannot fill. Their usual tools, provoking you, shifting blame, guilt-tripping, turning on the charm, suddenly stop working because all of those tools depend on getting some kind of reaction out of you. Without that reaction, the patterns holding up their sense of superiority start to crumble. They begin to feel genuinely confused and unsettled because the control they always assumed they had is nowhere to be found. Your calm presence unsettles them because it signals their influence is fading. Their emotional leverage no longer works, and the entire dynamic they built has shifted for good. It's important to understand that calm detachment isn't passive at all. It's actually a powerful, deliberate form of engagement. It tells them you're still present, but you're no longer available for manipulation. You hold on to your boundaries and your dignity without handing them anything to escalate. Narcissists find this incredibly destabilizing because they're simply not used to facing resistance that doesn't come wrapped in an emotional reaction. They're forced to confront the real consequences of their own actions in a way that anger could never make them face. When they realize their usual tricks no longer work, they often feel enormous pressure to adjust, to negotiate, or even to apologize. Again, this has nothing to do with sudden empathy. It's because your calm has completely erased the advantage they used to hold over you. This shift quietly but powerfully rebalances the entire dynamic. It shows them, without a single argument, that emotional manipulation no longer has any effect, that access to you now comes with conditions, and that their influence over your life has real limits. Here's the part worth sitting with. You cannot teach a narcissist genuine empathy. That's simply not on the table. But you absolutely can change the entire equation by changing your own behavior instead. Narcissists operate purely out of self-interest and a hunger for outside validation, not from any real internal moral compass. Their emotional framework was never built to process the pain they cause other people in any meaningful or compassionate way. Sitting them down and explaining exactly how their actions hurt you is extremely unlikely to produce real understanding or true remorse. They might nod along, fake agreement, or even mimic something that looks like empathy just to keep control of the conversation. But real emotional resonance is almost never something they're capable of offering you. So instead of trying to force empathy out of someone who simply doesn't have it to give, the far more effective move is changing the dynamics that made their behavior work in the first place. By changing how you respond, you take away the very tools they've relied on, forcing them to operate differently if they still want any access or influence in your life. That means fully removing the emotional reactions that used to hand them power over you. It means holding your boundaries consistently, so that crossing them always comes with a real consequence. It means no longer justifying, explaining, or defending yourself in ways that feed their sense of superiority. Doing this shifts the balance of power back where it belongs, with you. A narcissist may never feel remorse the way a person with genuine empathy would, but they will absolutely feel deep discomfort, frustration, and a real sense of loss once their usual strategies stop working. And that discomfort, not empathy, is what can actually trigger something resembling an apology or a temporary shift in behavior. Changing your own behavior also sends a very clear message. Your emotional and psychological well-being now comes first. It tells them that their ability to manipulate or use you is limited and entirely conditional. They're forced to face the uncomfortable truth that their old tactics no longer work, and that you're simply not going to hand over the reactions they've always relied on. In response, they might attempt to reconcile, offer an apology, or show some temporary change in how they treat you. Not because they've truly absorbed the harm they caused, but because keeping their desired position or access now requires an entirely different approach than the one they're used to. By focusing on your own consistent actions, your detachment, and protecting yourself, you create an environment where their bad behavior no longer slides by unchecked. This whole approach was never about changing who they are on the inside. It's about permanently changing how they're allowed to interact with you from here on out. There's something else worth understanding here, something that rarely gets talked about. The apology you eventually receive, if it comes at all, is not the finish line. It's tempting to treat it like proof that everything is finally different, that the person you loved has woken up and seen the truth of what they did. But an apology born out of fear of losing supply rarely holds up once that fear fades. The moment they sense your guard coming down again, the moment they feel secure that you're not actually going anywhere, the old patterns tend to resurface almost exactly as they were before. That doesn't mean the apology was worthless or that your boundary didn't work. It means the boundary has to keep working over and over for as long as the relationship continues in any form. Real change, if it ever comes at all, is measured in consistent behavior over months and years, not in a single moment of remorse delivered at exactly the point when they felt you slipping through their fingers. This is also where a lot of people get stuck, waiting for the apology to mean more than it actually does. They hear the right words, see the right tears, and their guard drops completely, because finally, someone understood what they went through. But understanding and self-preservation can look remarkably similar on the surface, and only time reveals which one you actually received. The healthiest thing you can do in that moment is to notice the words, acknowledge them if you want to, but keep watching the actions that follow. Does the behavior actually change over the following weeks, or does it quietly drift back to the same old patterns the second the pressure lifts? Your answer to that question will tell you far more than any apology ever could, no matter how convincing or emotional it sounded in the moment. It also helps to remember that none of this, the withdrawal, the boundaries, the calm detachment, is really about changing the narcissist at all. It never was. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself that got handed over piece by piece across months or years of trying to be understood by someone who was never wired to understand you the way you needed. Every boundary you hold, every moment of calm you manage to maintain, every time you choose not to explain yourself for the 100th time, you are quietly building something for yourself. You are proving to your own nervous system that you can survive their disapproval, that their anger doesn't have to control your next move, and that your peace doesn't depend on their approval anymore. That shift, more than any apology they might eventually offer, is the real transformation happening here. If you take nothing else away from this, take this. Your job was never to make them see the truth. Their capacity to feel real remorse was never something you had the power to create or unlock through the right words, the right amount of patience, or the right kind of love. What you do have power over is how much access they get to your emotional world going forward, how consistently you protect your own boundaries, and how quickly you notice the difference between an apology rooted in fear and a change rooted in genuine growth. Protect your peace first. Let their behavior, not their words, tell you everything you need to know about what happens next. And one last thing worth carrying with you, none of this requires you to hate them, to prove a point, or to punish them for what they've done. Calm detachment isn't revenge dressed up in a softer outfit. It's simply the most honest response available to you once you understand what's actually happening beneath the surface of the relationship. You're not obligated to explain your growth to someone who never respected your pain in the first place. You're not obligated to announce your boundaries loudly or defend them when they're tested. You just have to hold them, quietly and repeatedly, until holding them becomes as natural as breathing. Somewhere along the way, without you even fully noticing it happen, you stop waiting for their apology to feel complete. You stop needing them to finally understand. Your peace stops being something they can grant or take away and starts being something you carry with you regardless of what they do or say next. That, far more than any apology, is what real freedom from this dynamic actually looks like.